anxietycenter.com.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hi.
Hi. Well, I wanted to thank you, brave souls, for joining us in our first discussion via Skype. I hope this will be helpful to everyone. So why don't we start with questions? Who would like to give me your question first, and we can start from there?
Well, I would love to, because I'm not going to be able to be on for more than about 20 minutes.
Okay.
So Is that all right if I begin?
That's fine. You bet. You can come and go. You bet.
Okay. My question is, I hear from my regular doctor, the only doctor that I go to just to get Ambien, that there's a relationship between depression and anxiety, and I am wondering if it's possible that depression is simply an aftermath of anxiety, possibly. Because I remember being very anxious as a child, but then also having depression in my 20s. And I'm wondering if it was just that I was used to a lot of stress hormones. Mm-hmm. And then when I would relax or something, I don't know. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. Okay. It is common for anxiety and depression to coexist. If you're to look at both conditions, they stem from the same kinds of things. Anxiety stems from thinking fearfully, which stresses the body, and depression stems from thinking negatively, which also stresses the body. Now, both stress, buildup of stress can lead to anxiety and depression. For example, if a person has a disposition to be more fearful, then it'll turn into anxiety. Their stress, as the body stimulates, will become overstimulated, and their fearful thinking will become more predominant, and that usually leads to an anxiety disorder. Or, on the other hand, if a person has a predisposition to think negatively more so, then that stress buildup will cause them to feel down, hopeless, helpless, and trapped, and that's what leads to depression. Now, again, they both can coexist because they often stem from the same kind of factors. It's from unhealthy beliefs and thinking patterns. So they can occur independent of each other. Just really depends on how that person has their system of beliefs set up. Does that make sense?
Well, in a way, it seems, however, that anxiety, anxiety and fear can be happening simultaneously, and it seems like anxiety ramps you up, and negative thinking and anxiety. Yeah. So isn't one sort of ramping you up and the other sort of going the other direction?
Well, it just depends on the outlook you use. For example, it is common for those who struggle with anxiety to become so fed up with their condition they just feel helpless, hopeless, and trapped, which means we become down. So that can also occur. But the reverse can also occur too. If you think of the negative self-talk, some people's negative self-talk will be pessimistic, others will be fearfully pessimistic. So again, you see how they can both fit. If you're to look at the circles of anxiety and depression, they very, very closely overlap, and for those reasons. It just depends on if the person's going to think more fearfully than negatively or more negatively than fearfully.
But in either case, you have a buildup of stress hormones?
It's usually, in terms of depression, it's usually that a person has stressed themselves a great deal and their body just feels down. And again, it is the silent buildup of stress, but what causes that silent buildup of stress is the unhealthy behaviors. For example, people-pleasing, perfectionistic, have unrealistic expectations. If a person drives themselves that way, their body can become stressed, and once it gets stressed, it can cause them to feel really, really down in the dumps and devoid of energy and hopeless, helpless, and trapped. But if we also then have the likelihood of thinking fearfully, that same stress can also go that way too, which means it cranks us up. So it just depends on how a person has their system of beliefs structured. Those who don't think as fearfully as anxiety disorder personalities do typically won't see the anxiety component, but the reverse is also true. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I'm still confused about whether the adrenaline and cortisol is something that builds up from, what's the relationship between a buildup of that and depression?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, when if a person, again, lives stressfully, again, by being a people pleaser, pushing themselves hard, really doesn't accept themselves very well as a person, so they're kind of nervous all the time and they put pressure on themselves to perform, that is going to stress the body, and cortisol is going to spike up. But because they're not thinking fearfully at the same time, what if this and what if that and all these kind of things, their body's not going to get to the high point of stimulation that stress overstimulation can cause. So what they do is they will get themselves run down and their body will just feel devoid of energy. Whereas on the other hand, with anxiety, if a person is doing the what if this and what if that and what if this isn't going to work and what if I have a condition, what if I have an illness, if they do that, then they're going to be getting stress hormone boosts all the time, and that keeps stress hormones up. And so in one area you get fatigued and tired without the fear component. On the other end, you get the overstimulation kind of paradox of being fearfully overtired. It's that nervous energy that kicks in by being more fearful. So there is a thin line that separates the two, and we see it rather distinctly when it comes down to how a person learns to think. A person with depression typically doesn't have the fearful side of them involved, whereas the anxiety personality usually does. So it's a dividing line. Let me just see if I can explain that a bit clearer. Stress hormones can make us tired, and that's what, if you are familiar with the term adrenal fatigue.
Yes, that's what I thought I had. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happens when we continue to push our body by being fearful and anxious and stressed. And
Right.
over the course of time, the body just gets really run down and out of energy. But then if we become fearful about how we feel, that keeps cortisol levels high, so it sort of goes beyond the run down stage.
Ah, okay. Now it's making some sense.
Okay. And if a person who's depressed but doesn't have the fearful side, they will just get run down, but because their background leads them to think more negatively than others, then that's how we get stuck there. We're down, we become depressed, our moods are low, and so what happens, they just stay there and then you just think negative, down, and depressed thoughts. So they get sort of trapped that way, whereas an anxiety personality will scare themselves. That's the difference. One thinks down and trapped, the other one scares themselves, right?
Okay. Okay, I don't want to dominate.
Yeah. So now, did I answer your question, though?
Yes, it helps. Thank you. And I'll think about it some more, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Again, what we see is when we work with people who struggle with depression is that there is a big difference, and that is the person who's depressed typically doesn't have the fearful component to the same degree as that someone who's anxious does. Now, anxiety also usually includes negativity, though. So anxiety personalities sort of struggle in two areas. That's why they often coexist, right?
Yeah, they coexist in me, and I'll have to think about what you're saying. Maybe I can put it together better.
The other
in
thing,
hindsight.
the other thing too with depression is that, as well as anxiety, is that both people usually struggle from low self-acceptance. The depressive person usually doesn't really like themselves that much. That's why they can often they use a victim approach to life, but without the fearful side. Whereas the anxiety person usually doesn't really like themselves, low self-esteem, doesn't accept themselves that much, but also has the fearful side too.
I don't have low self-esteem. Yeah.
Most people don't think they do. However, if you were to look at the behaviors...
then they do.
Yeah, for example, are you a people pleaser?
No.
No? Do you avoid confrontation?
No.
No. Are you particularly afraid of a certain thing?
No.
So then what is at the root of your anxiety?
Fear that I won't be able to accomplish something that somehow, on the back of my mind, I know I have to accomplish.
Okay.
In order for things to go well. And I know it's just left over from having lived under tremendous amounts of pressure. Like, piano recital every week, tennis tournaments, all this kind of stuff, and I had to do it. Yep. And so I got really brave, but afraid under it all.
Mm-hmm. So what were you afraid of then?
I was afraid that what would happen is that I would forget the notes, and that very likely could happen. It was a reality. Yep. Or that I would suddenly not be able to hit a certain shot in tennis, because that did happen and would happen when the anxiety would flood over me. Suddenly I lost all my coordination. So I was afraid of things that really were happening.
Okay, let's go to the next level then. So if that occurred, if you flubbed some notes and missed the shot, then what's the worst possible outcome? I didn't believe in God, and neither did my family. So that was who I was. I had no other self. Yeah. So if you were to play poorly, or in both the sports or your music, would people think less of you because you didn't do as well?
I don't think I thought that far. I just knew that I had to do this. it was everything seemed to be depending on it.
Okay.
Everyone was expectations, and I just thought I had to meet them.
So you didn't want to disappoint anybody?
I didn't. Yeah. Well, I thought they needed me to be strong.
Okay. But again, what's the risk though if you weren't strong?
That. Let's see. Maybe that they would fall apart. My dad.
Okay. And if they would fall apart, then what would happen? Because there's always a risk as to why our fears are there. You have a fear of this. That's what anxiety is all about, a fear.
Right.
And we're always fearful of the what if, the ultimate worst thing that can happen. So what would that ultimate worst thing be if that happened? Would it be fear of failure?
Or a fear of success. I never could figure out whether it was fear of failure or success.
Okay.
Because my dad was putting too many eggs in the basket, which was me.
Okay, alrighty. And you didn't want to drop them, but if you dropped them again, what would be a bad outcome?
Well, I was caught both ways. If I dropped them, he would be disappointed. If I succeeded, he would be too interested in my success.
Okay.
So I guess I'm not answering your question, am I?
Well, we're getting there. Sometimes it is sort of down there, but again, usually people are fearful of making mistakes or performing poorly because it reflects poorly on them, and then what that means. For some people, it's just if they don't do very well, then they're afraid that other people are going to think less of them. And if we think that people think less of us because we don't perform perfectly, then that's because we haven't accepted ourselves and our human condition. We're so fearful of making mistakes that fear overrides what really is true. And what's true is that we all make mistakes. That's just part of life.
Except that my parents, their value system was that you weren't, you were your success.
There you go. Yeah. So as a person, you didn't accept yourself as who you are, or maybe you put too much emphasis on what your parents expect of you, therefore you were afraid. Now, let me just take it a little bit further here. Because again, I'm not fully understanding it just yet, but if, for example, you put a lot of emphasis on what your parents thought of your performance, then you became a performance-based personality, which means your value is wrapped up in how well you do, not you as a person.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I knew that I wasn't God because life showed me that I couldn't uphold the image that I had to uphold.
Right. Okay. So the risk was that you weren't going to be able to succeed to the level that your parents would approve of you.
Let's see. Not just that. I mean, it was like I would be a complete failure in my own eyes too, because I didn't know that there was any other reality than the one that I was trying to support of who I was.
Yeah. And that's what I mean by self-acceptance. If we think our value is wrapped up in what we do, then we're always afraid of not doing our best because then it diminishes our value. But if we do accept ourselves, we would recognize right away that, you know what, I'm going to only do as good as I'm going to do, and that's okay. It's not
but I couldn't accept myself as a child, and I can now, but I'm still stuck with this same, maybe.
You see what I'm getting at here? It usually does come down to self-acceptance. A lot of us don't accept our humanness as being okay. We always think we have to be way better than our humanness, and therefore it puts pressure on us to not fail, whether it's disappointing others or whatever. But we want to move to a place of self-acceptance where you say, you know what, I'm going to do as good as I'm going to do, and that's okay. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I'm fine the way I am. And if our society was structured in such a way where we were more accepting of our shortcomings, we would have a lot less stress and anxiety and depression. Now, depression, on the other hand, also follows in that same vein, is because if we are continually putting pressure on ourselves to succeed and perform and to not fail, but yet if the risk is there to fail, then we can become hopeless, helpless, and trapped to not being able to change things. So we just sort of become stuck. It's like, what's the point in trying? I'm not good enough. I may as well just give up. rather
Well,
than...
intellectually, I knew all of this, but I guess I must have not known it as well as I thought.
Yeah, and that's usually how this works, and it usually comes when parents put pressure on us to perform. And now you talked about fear of success. Well, the fear of success usually stems from, well, if I succeed here, it just means I have to do way better the next time.
Right, that's it. That's it.
So the bar always keeps going up, and we're always fearful of not making the bar, right?
Right, that's it.
So again, it comes back to acceptance. If you were to recognize, you know what? When you perform, you're going to do as good as you're going to do that day, and that's okay. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. Your value and self-worth isn't tied to what you do. Then we can be a lot more relaxed about what we do and fully recognizing we're going to make mistakes, period. That's just how it is. Anything beyond that is really unrealistic expectations, right?
Right, you're right.
So do you see how that works?
I do, and I guess my intellect is ahead of my actual belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It comes down to our system of beliefs and what we were taught in terms of where we put our emphasis and importance and value, but that's what we challenge in counseling, is to go after those and say, wait a minute, just because you have that there doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's healthy. So we have to challenge it with reality, and that is, we are imperfect beings and we're always going to be. The best we can do is the best we can do, but it's not a reflection of our character. It's just who we are, right? And we can be okay with that. Low stress, right?
Right. I hope you're recording this so I can listen to it again.
I am. Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's a good question, and I know we've sort of covered it in a very, very multitude of directions in a short period of time, but the gist is if we were to learn to accept ourselves and to say, you know what, I'm not going to be perfect, and my value as a person isn't based on what I do, then we can be more accepting of imperfections, and guess what? We're going to get along great, and our anxiety and depression is going to go way down.
That may be true. I'm going to really have to think about it.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to have to, well, I want to listen for a little bit of somebody else.
Oh, sure, you bet.
Then I'll have to sign out.
Okay, you bet.
Okay.
Anytime,
Okay.
yeah.